Good afternoon, everyone. I am Joby Transporte. I'll be reporting for today. So today we tackle part 5. It is all about inspection of aircraft upon arrival from foreign airports. So section 29, aircraft to be inspected. All aircraft from foreign airports are subject of quarantine inspection upon entry in any aircraft of the Philippines. So this section, all aircraft are subject of quarantine inspection and bisan asa nga airport sa Pilipinas. Aircraft cleared sa usa ka airport sa Pilipinas nay makatakod nga sakit nga ilalom nga regulation emerging disease public health emergency of international concern and death on board. Section 30, requirements of aircraft to be inspected. Aircraft from foreign airport bound to the Philippines shall land first at an aircraft of entry, unless permission to land elsewhere is first granted by appropriate authorities, and after such permission has been granted, the director of quarantine must immediately be notified on the time and place of arrival. This section gikan daw sa tagpo sa aircraft padung sa Pilipinas kinahanglan motugpa una sa usa ka tugpahan sa pagsulod gawas unless permission to land nga gihatag sa angay nga mga authorities human sunod sa director. Kinahanglan daw nagpahibalo dayon ang quarantine sa oras ug lugar sa pag. Section 31, requirement from the commander of aircraft to be inspected. So the aircraft commander of the airline representative must inform the Bureau of Quarantine before its arrival the following condition on board. So this section must be the commander or representative sa eroplano kinahanglan magpahibaw sa Bureau of Quarantine sa dili pa naabot ang mosunod nga mga kondisyon sakay sa aircraft. First, he shall be provided a passenger list and seat number. Next, case of the infection, disease subject to the regulation, emerging disease, and death on board from any cause. Section 32. Boarding of aircraft placed under quarantine in case of notification of the presence of suspected. So in case of notification of the presence of suspected case of infectious disease subject to the regulation, emerging disease, or public health emergency of international concern. So suspect cases shall be medically evaluated of the holding area and transported to a designated referral hospital for isolation. Suspect nga kaso kinahanglan niya medical balance sa lugar na transported sa usa ka gitudlo na referral hospital for isolation. Section 33. Vector control for aircraft. All aircraft shall be disinfected in accordance with the rules and regulation of the World Health Organization and International Civil Aviation Organization or ICAO. So this section for all aircraft kinahanglan niya mag-disinfect subay sa mga regulation of World Organization of ICAO. Section 34, requirements of aircraft before departure. No aircraft shall be allowed to depart from any aircraft of the Philippines to foreign destination without securing an outgoing quarantine clearance from the Director of Quarantine or duly authorized representative. So, this section is no aircraft nga gitugutan daw nga mobiya sa bisan asang tugpahan sa Pilipinas padung sa destination niya dili makuha og outgoing quarantine clearance gikan sa director sa quarantine sa authorized nga representative. Section 35, embarkation of travelers for international flight. The director of quarantine, when consider it necessary, may order the medical examination of travelers and may disallow at any suspended person having an infectious disease subject to the relegation. Emerging or public health emergency of international concern from embarking on an international flight except in case of the transport of sick person by for conveyance provided for the purpose in order to safeguard the health, the passenger and crew. Section 36. Personnel assignated for aircraft inspection. The quarantine inspection of aircraft shall be conducted by the quarantine medical officer or duly accredited assistant or designated by the director of quarantine. This section, the quarantine inspection sa aircraft is nagpahibaw sa quarantine medical official ug usa ka akreditado nga katabang gitudlo sa direktor sa quarantine. Section 37. Time of aircraft quarantine inspection. This section inspection of aircraft required by this regulation shall be made between 800 to 1,000 hours and 1,300 and 1,700 hours Mondays to Fridays. Any inspection performed outside of these hours and during Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays shall be compensated for, hence reasonable reimbursement by the consignee may be allowed by the director of the quarantine in relation to be incurred expenses and service rendered by each quarantine personnel. Part 6. Requirements of domestic aircraft. Section 38. Aircraft to be inspected. This section, all domestic aircraft with the existence of an infectious disease subject to the regulation emerging disease, public health emergencies of international concern, and that on board are subjected to quarantine inspection. Section 39. Requirements from the commander of the aircraft to be inspected. So this section, the aircraft commander or the airline representative must inform the Bureau of Quarantine before the arrival of the following on board. Section 40. Immunization requirements. The Director of Quarantine may from time to time prescribe or require immunization from certain disease if in his discretion such requirements are essential on account of varying public health conditions. Section 41. Embarkation of travelers from domestic flights. The Director of Quarantine may be disallowed the embarkation of any suspected person having a contagious disease or of infectious disease subject to the regulation emerging disease on public health emergency of international concern in order to safeguard the health of the crew and other passengers. Section 42. Personnel assignated for inspection of domestic aircraft. The quarantine inspection of domestic aircraft shall be conducted by the quarantine medical officer and his duly accredited assistantly or designated by the director of the quarantine. Section 43. Boarding of the domestic aircraft placed under quarantine. So this section, in case of notification of the represents of suspected cases of infectious disease subject to the regulations, emerging disease, public health emergency of international concern, and death on board of the aircraft. First, suspect case shall be medically evaluated at the holding area and transported to a designated referral hospital for isolation. Next, the remaining passenger and crew of aircraft, if they need races, shall be medically evaluated in the quarantine inspection area at the port terminal. Next, any person who enters the confines of the quarantine inspection area during the quarantine inspection of passenger without the permission of the quarantine medical officer shall be subject to the quarantine restriction. Part 7. Detention of conveyance under quarantine. Section 44. Conveyance placed in detention. Any vessel of aircraft which the director of the quarantine determines of considered to the infected with disease subject to the regulation emerging disease and public health emergency of international concern shall be detained in quarantine. Section 45. Requirements of conveyance in detention. No conveyance under quarantine is allowed to move or whenever without the permission of the director of quarantine. Vessels under quarantine shall be yellow flag, white under detention. Section 46, Detention of Persons. This section, on board conveyance under detention shall be subjected to all the restriction imposed by the director of the quarantine. So, inspection daw sa aircraft ipahigayon sa quarantine medical official ug sa tanang restriction imposed by the director of the quarantine.